Today I had the opportunity to go up to my old high school, and it brought back a lot of memories, a lot of really good ones. In particular, I was a real car nut back in high school. I spent a lot of time out in the driver's ed range, working on my car instead of in class, all that kind of stuff. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of share a couple of those with you. In particular, there's a certain picture that is very famous for all my friends, and I'd like to share that with you and kind of talk about that a little bit and some of the cars that I had in high school. Let's explore it and check out some of the muscle cars of Mad Dog Merv.
Our story actually begins when I was 14 years old. I was interested in cars, and my brother had left me some money in his savings account when he passed away. And I found a neighbor who had this 68 Cougar just sitting on the side of their apartment. I offered him $50 for it, and he took it. So off I took, brought it home, started to get into it, clean it up. The first thing I bought for it was this Cal Custom 12-inch air cleaner and these Cobra valve covers. Man, I really like those Cobra valve covers. Of course, I went and got some nice yellow Excel wires and put on it. Ooh, make the engine look really good. It's the first thing I did before I even started the body. But eventually I started to work on the body a bit. These mag wheels and tires I actually got for a pretty good deal. It was like $150. They had been on a Volkswagen, a custom Volkswagen with a tilt front end and a V6 in it that had blown the motor, and I got these wheels from it. But I did some of this body work, put some side pipes on it, put a hood scoop on it. Over the couple of years that I had it, I did more body work to it. Decided I'd put some flames on it. I thought, oh wow, flames are going to look really, really cool. One of the things I did is I wound up needing a new engine because that old one, well, it finally just, it was just too tired. I actually was able to get a 302 that was in the shop that had been donated by Ford Motor Company back in the 1970s. And I bought some heads, rebuilt this motor, got it all together, put this high-rise manifold on it, and actually it ran pretty darn good. I had a 480 lift, 268 duration cam in it. Gave me some pretty good power, even with this automatic transmission. Car went pretty darn well, and I sure enjoyed driving it. Because most of the time it was in primer and didn't look very neat, my friends called the car Mervin's Miracle. You can see it here with the hood scoop that I added, and I finally took some spray cans and painted the whole body in this beautiful blue with, of course, the flames. And this is kind of what everybody knew it as. Eventually, though, I actually sanded it all down, put a real paint job on it by my senior year, and here it is in this Le Mans blue that I painted it. It really was pretty. And I had this through the rest of high school. Sometimes it was broken down, sometimes it was running, but this was my first car. Well, here I am at the ripe old age of 17 in Highland High School's driver's ed parking lot. I'm there with my 1972 Mercury Comet. On the very far left is my friend Danny Miller with his 73 Charger, and then David Knopfsinger next to him in the 72 Nova. And on the far right is Mark Miller with his 72 Dodge Demon. As some of you already know, I quite often use the models that I've built to replicate some of the things that I have owned. This particular one is of my first 1972 Comet, which had a 6-cylinder in it, a 250 cubic inch 6-cylinder with an automatic transmission. I picked it up from my sister's best friend for, I think it was $300 or $350. Anyway, it had a tow hitch on it. I added some mud flaps. I put some really nice radial TAs on it, even though it had the stock hubcaps. It was a pretty clean car. Needed a little bit of work on one of the fenders, a little bit of paint work, and I took care of that. So it was a very nice looking little car. Had a real hard shift to it. Somebody had put a shift kit in it, and for a 6-cylinder engine, well, it didn't get the best of mileage, and it didn't have the most power, but it really was a nice little one to get around in high school. It was a really nice car while my Cougar was broken down, but I really wanted a V8, and I had a neighbor that had a 1972 Comet GT with a 302 in it. It had a little bit of primer on it, and the interior wasn't as nice as my green one, but we worked out a deal. a couple of $100. I traded in my car and my speakers that I'd just gotten for Christmas, and I acquired this nice GT. It had the 302 with a 2-barrel in it, which I immediately took off and put a 4-barrel on. And quickly I took the hood scoop off and I put this big snorkel hood scoop on it. It's quite interesting. My senior year, when I got my tax return check, I took the money and I bought a tunnel ram with, it was a Hawaiian tunnel ram with 2 4-barrel Hollies, and I put that on, and that's why I really needed that snorkel. The car didn't perform very well with it, but it sure did look neat. I wound up with this car through the rest of my high school days. Anyway, back to our picture. So on the far left is Danny Miller in his 1973 Dodge Charger. Had a 400 with an automatic. He tried to put a 6-pack on it at one time and that didn't work, but it did have a 4-barrel. It really got up and went. We went to the drags a couple times in it. It was a real fun car. This model here I painted with an actual Dodge red in a 2-stage paint system that I had available at the time that I built the model. Between me and Danny was Dave Knopfsinger and his 72 Nova that had belonged to his parents. He took it and he painted it in like a 69 Corvette blue. It was really pretty, but he never did get a top put on it. He did buy some mags. He rebuilt it was a 307 in it, and he actually rebuilt it, got a 350 input in it. The car really would move. He got a shift kit in which he had a manual valve body. So it was a real goer. Unfortunately, well, Dave kind of dropped out of high school, and so did the car. And finally, on the right side of the picture, we have Mark Miller in his 1972 Dodge Demon. This was kind of a fun car. Mark had picked this up from his, I think it was his dad's girlfriend at the time. She had actually driven this car. It was a powder blue, had a 225 6-cylinder automatic in it. I think he paid $600 for it. It was a neat build. He actually wanted a 340, but wound up with I think it was a 318, completely rebuilt with a 4-barrel put in it. He did put an 8 3/4 rear end out of a 67 Belvedere in it, which was kind of interesting. He painted the car in kind of a Ford dark blue with this really cool stripe on it, and had a sunroof. This car was a lot of fun. Again, we enjoyed a lot of good times in it. Wasn't very fast. Most of its life, it did have that 225 in it, but eventually he did get the V8, and well, unfortunately, like everything else, it didn't survive after high school. It was actually in our senior year that he put that V8 in it, and toward the end of our senior year, he repainted the car in a brighter blue, and then had these silver stripes that went all the way back to the trunk and went over. I built this funny car model to kind of replicate his second paint job. Nowadays, Mark and Dave and I are still good friends, and we hang out together from time to time. Here's a picture with us and our friend Mike Mertlick, who has passed away, but the three of us are still pretty tight. Danny Miller went on to other things, and we haven't heard much from him in our adult life. Speaking of Mark, shortly before he got his Demon, I had an opportunity to buy a 1970 Plymouth Duster. It was orange with a black vinyl top. It had black interior, had orange shag carpet on the floor, had reclining bucket seats, really kind of neat. It had a V8 in it. It had belonged to a guy named Ron Cox, who was an upperclassman, and Ron sold it to me for $150. I drove it home. The problem was it made a lot of noise on the way home, and once I got it there, shortly afterwards the engine let go. Turns out it had spun a rod bearing. So I decided to go ahead and part the car out. And some of the parts I sold to Mark. Eventually, I just completely parted it out and was able to sell the rest of it to a gentleman, and it was no more. But the rear rims, I actually took off and put on my Cougar for a short period of time, and then they found an eventual permanent home on my Comet. It was really a neat looking car. When we tore into it, we found out that originally it was sublime green, and somebody hated that, so they had repainted it in this orange color. Mark was really jealous because he had wanted a V8 and almost bought the engine, but I told him, look, it's spun a bearing, it's not going to be any good for you. The only picture I have of the car is this one of the trunk, where I had taken a model and I put up there to take a picture of it. The duster actually sat for a few months in the driveway before we wound up getting rid of it. So a few years ago I built a model of the car, and a friend of mine, Ron Starr, took this really cool picture. He had blown up a picture that we had of the old Highland Drive-In on Highland Drive in Salt Lake City and borrowed my car and made this cool picture with it.